I'm Tom Mennier, and you're listening to CVS Podcast. This is the second 5-part series in which Tom and David continue their discussions on matters of theological and cultural concern. A two-way Q&A, Series 2, Part 4. Questions on the information war and beauty as a transcendental. We live in what's known as the information age. We are also living through what's known as the information war. What are your thoughts on this matter?
Well, we just talked about St. Augustine and his battle for the truth of doctrine and of virtue, and all of this can be written down on parchments or in books or typed onto the internet. Mm-hmm. It's all information.
It's information. It's an obsession with information.
It's information. So the information war, it's a very broad and abstract topic for me to tackle, but I would just say that God is knowledge, God is science, God is truth, and our duty and responsibility is to tell the truth. If we're going to communicate, we have to communicate the truth. Mm-hmm. And we could talk about journalism and the integrity of the journalists today, or we could talk about the politicians and the integrity of the politicians today, their adherence to truth. We could talk about the salesmen and their adherence to truth. And the information that they give will affect their bottom line. I mean, even if you're in the medical profession, the information you share, you choose to share or not to share, will affect your bottom line, your profitability. I know medical professionals who have clinics in the United States who refuse to get government money to promote a certain so-called solution to a certain so-called problem that we lived through recently, and they paid the price financially. Others of their colleagues went the other way, and they accepted the money, and they provided other information, and they withheld certain other information, and they made a choice, and it's all about information war. It's an information war. Which side of the war are you on? Do you have principles upon which you will base your decisions?
Yes, well, principles is a good word. The reason why I'm asking this question is that I'm very fascinated by this modern obsession with information in a post-truth world, in a postmodern world. Information? Is that all there is? Data and information?
Well, it's like divorcing flavor from nutrients.
Yeah, that's it.
So I've got all the flavors under the sun with the rainbow spectrum of flavors, but don't come to me for a nutritive value because you're not going to get any. So this is what they've done with information. It's like there is no truth, but come and get the information from me. But there's no truth. But this is interesting information, something that you might delight you or you could use to manipulate your situation on your quest for your truth as you define yourself and what your sex is and everything else.
That's right.
And here's some information for you and have at it. As opposed to the rightly ordered will and intellect which submits to God Almighty and strives to please Him and strives to discipline the self. That's why we are told by the Church that we are priest, prophet, and king. The king part is self-mastery. The prophet part is speaking the truth and guarding and protecting the truth. And the priest part is the worship of God.
Yes, and we can't do that unless we have a firm grounding in the broader principles. Principles guide us in a larger frame of reference. And information can be nitpicked. Information can be compiled in such a way that leads to false conclusions, even though every ounce of the information is true. And then once we get in the habit of that, it's very easy to slip in any number of lies within the information, and it's not even noticed, because we've lost our reference points to discern that which is false and true. But nonetheless, very effective propaganda can be 99% and even 100% true. It's the stuff they leave out and the conclusions that they steer us to because we're not grounded in principles and we have lost the ability to discern. So information replaces wisdom. Information and even the study of ethics are some of the most powerful devices of deception in the modern age. You can frame it any way you want. And you could still be uttering common sense, ethical values and 100% correct data and information. And this is why the deception is so powerful.
I'm thinking about a man and a woman. There's silence as they both are at work together. And then the man turns to the woman and starts critiquing the woman's clothing, with his aesthetic knowledge. He knows about fashion and style. But as he's 2 minutes into a 3-hour lecture on the history of fashion and where she's gone wrong today, she just can't help but interrupt and say, well, look, shouldn't you get back to your patient on the gurney here with your brain surgery? Like, this is not the time and the place. It doesn't matter how brilliant you are, and we'll talk about it later, but right now you've got a guy that needs your skills as a brain surgeon. So this is how I see the modern world today, where we've lost touch with the big picture, and not only the big picture, but the here and the now in a very Zen way. What am I doing? Who am I?
Yeah.
What is my role? What is appropriate right now?
Yeah.
There's so many occasions where we think that we're justified in our tangent or in our criticism or in our enlightening our brothers and sisters when it's not the right time, it's not the right place, and we're actually neglecting our duties, and we're actually doing great harm, and the masses are fooled by the justification. Well, it's true what I was saying, and this is the proof of what I was saying, and you can't convince me otherwise, and here's why. And we get lost in that, and we start nodding along with him. Yeah, he's right, he's right, he's right. And then the fool who's not buying into this groupthink will say, but the guy on the table is going to die unless unless you turn your attention to what's most important here. And so with the salvation of our souls, it's the same thing. I don't care how brilliant you are. If you're neglecting the salvation of your soul and the care of your wife and kids and your community, it's all moot.
That's it.
And it's a damnable sin.
Yes. Corinthians, the thing on love.
The clanging gong.
The clanging gong, it's nothing without love. Yeah. It's valueless.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're building shrines to the clanging gongs. The trick of Satan is that as long as we can forget about the context, and as long as we can forget about our duties, as long as we can just forget about God and our soul and our eternal destiny, then we naturally fall prey to the arguments. Well, he's right, and what he's saying is meaningful, and I've got a textbook at home that corroborates what he's saying, and da-da-da-da-da. But it's all completely missing the point. It's like any shell game. You have in the audience people that are helping you to keep people distracted in just the right way so that you can take their money, live to play another con game the next day. And if they're onto you, there's another village down the road. They don't know your tricks, and it's just the constant circus.
Yeah, information is all fine and good, but the first goal must be truth and an understanding of the principles. That tree of broader understanding is being slayed before our very eyes.
Beauty is sometimes excluded from the list of transcendentals, the one, the true, the good, and the beautiful. But I think it is essential. How might created beauty lead one to the one, the good, and the true God, who is beauty itself?
Well, I agree that beauty should be considered a transcendental, but let's try to define the essence of capital B beauty so that it is not confused with something that is, quote unquote, in the eye of the beholder. So I would boil it down to elegance, simplicity, intelligibility, wholeness, completeness, purity, radiance, perfection. These are some identifiers that come to mind. Examining a leaf with the naked eye can reveal marvels regarding the patterns and relationships of parts, etc. Then zooming in with a telescope reveals even more amazing patterns and relationships and mysteries. Or listening to a Beethoven symphony may or may not touch the heart of a listener, but anyone who is guided through the musical microscope, as it were, can come to appreciate the sheer elegance of its construction in terms of logic, proportion, intelligibility, and relationship of parts, and how it all comes together to create a whole architecture. We are parts of God's creation, and being made in God's image, we are designed to take part in the act of creation, whether it's to create a piece of music or create a business or procreate and nurture children. God is not merely beautiful, he is beauty itself in the full, infinite, and transcendent meaning of the word. And the transcendent essence of beauty is necessarily a nourishing spring that informs all the good that is in us and all the development and realization of our potentialities. The German composer J.S. Bach said that he created his music, quote, to the glory of God. Let's look deeply into what he actually meant by that. First, we notice the object is God instead of what? People, the world, other listeners. He wants to please God first and foremost. He is not out to please people or conform to their expectations. And to have this desire and ambition to please God, who is truth, perfection, and beauty itself, is to set the bar extremely high. Now, to the modern mind, this might sound preposterous, arrogant, even vain, but to the Catholic mind, it is an example of humility and devotion. In fact, it is a foundational principle of the Christian life to do everything unto God. So you look at the fruits of Bach's work, and you indeed see something very rich and plentiful, resonating through the ages. You analyze his works and you discover an incredible consistency and integrity of quality, uniting a diverse and large body of work. His polyphonic creations are constructed in ways that remind one of the detailed interconnectedness and elegance of biological and cosmological forms. Note that Bach was not seeking beauty first. He was seeking God. When you are trying to please God, you become extremely sensitive to any false or phony note that might intrude in the piece. You are focused on aiming true. And so vain pursuits focused on the effect and the awards, whereas authentic pursuits focus on the essence, and truth is its own reward. So getting back to the eye of the beholder problem, it's a question of consciousness. The smaller and more boxed in our state of consciousness is, the less is our range of seeing and knowing, both in breadth and depth. Logical argumentation can only go so far in convincing a blind person that this or that is beautiful. But you can help a blind person by lovingly inspiring them towards more courage. Because limited consciousness, ignorance, and so on, is mostly the product of fear. It's safer to stay blind, much safer to let others do your thinking for you. Avoid taking stock of yourself and being personally responsible. Avoid the risks of heartbreak and humiliation in the game of love. Avoid the truth that could upend your whole castle built on sand. And this is the natural habit of the flesh and world-oriented fallen human. So the vision and the ideal of what it is to be human is indeed a beautiful thing. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that. We have a beautiful ideal in our minds of what good humanity looks like, what a strong and brave character, intelligent, full of integrity, reliability, honesty. None of us are ignorant of this ideal. We can form it in our minds and we can immediately say, yeah. We have to be reminded, though, But that falls short itself because we cannot really grasp that full ideal of humanity without first and foremost holding up the heavenly ideal, putting everything in perspective under the eternal sovereign God. You know, if we're serious about doing anything of quality in our life, whether it's in the creative arts or putting together a business or running a school or whatever it is you do, you don't make beauty your first object. In fact, it's probably best to even forget about it. You focus on doing an excellent job. You focus on being as true as you can be. And then what manifests is a very beautiful situation indeed. One must lose themselves in order to find themselves. So all this identity politics with focusing on identity and demanding others recognize their identity is a complete inversion of this principle.
Yeah, so what you're talking about with the identity politics, if we can imagine a family with their kids and some play doctor, some play nurse, some play plumber, electrician, policeman, whatever, it's cute as long as it's in its proper place. But if the parents were to take this seriously, they would find themselves with plumbing that doesn't work, electricity that doesn't work, and their health would go down the tubes if they're calling on little Billy and Johnny to do these serious tasks, just because they bought into the identity of a cute little game. So it's the same thing with transgender and the LGBTQ and the so-called experts and anyone who's play acting. And there are shades on the spectrum. There's some people that do have 10 years of education in the field, but it's a nonsense education. So it's this form of identity, which is a counterfeit identity. I'm sorry to say, but there are publications, peer-reviewed publications in the scientific community that aren't worth the paper they're printed on.
That's right.
So it's because of the corruption and it's because of that. So how can we have an authentic expertise in any field, whether it's music or plumbing or whatever? It's to, like you said, pursue the true for the sake of the true, and the beauty will come naturally because the form is beautiful. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the principle of unity, which is built into beauty in the concrete particular case of Bach, who is not a Catholic but a Lutheran.
That's right.
And that's an argument to
Now that's
me.
Early. Now that was early. Remember,
It's early.
It's very early
It's
in this,
early.
before all the denominations,
It's early,
liberalism came
but
in.
it's still, it's still heretical. It is still heretical, and therefore, the beauty of Bach for my Lutheran brothers and sisters, even though they've strayed to such a degree today, but I will view Luther and his false religion with more mercy and more tenderness because of the music of Bach. It is helping with Christian unity. So I do believe that we can err and we can still sincerely love God. I do believe that Bach loved God more than I do, not less, more than I do.
Yeah.
I do sincerely believe that. And that to me is a good thing because why? Not because I'm going to stop trying to love God as much as Bach did, but because it shows that God has a plan for each and every one of us. And we don't need to lose sleep over the Lutherans or the Baptists or the Scientologists or anyone else that seems to be in grave error concerning doctrines. Because it's not about doctrine, it's about love. This is not to say that there's any salvation possible outside of the Catholic Church. It's just that we can wander, we can stray, we can err, and God has a plan to bring us back to unity. Because without unity, what are we going to have? Is God divided? Is Christ divided? St. Paul said. No, there's one God, there's one baptism, there's one church, and there's one Christ. It's all about unity. We can't pretend that we can let ourselves off the hook with unity, but in the meantime, while we're here in this messy fallen world, we can accommodate those whose journey has just begun, or they're in the middle of the journey, or God knows when they will take that last and final step to enter into the fullness of the Christian faith. But in the meantime, we can look at our brothers and sisters and appreciate that in many ways they're ahead of us in our walk with God. So that's how I see Bach. And so he helps with ecumenism, ironically enough. Do you see it the same way?
Yeah, I do. And I especially hold in mind the fact that the legacy and the training and the nurturing of Catholic wisdom is not far removed from Bach and his lineage. Okay, so being so early, and also he worked. He played and composed for the church. And I was raised Catholic and strayed, I'm sure, much further away from the original faith than Bach did as a Luther in my young years. And I always worked in the churches. My mother always worked in the churches. She's remained a devout Catholic as far as I know, but has played a United Church and Anglican churches and so on, just as a working musician. And Bach, in that sense, is no different. He was a working musician. So just how dogmatically convicted he was of Lutheranism is questionable. So I don't really make a big deal out of the fact that he was Lutheran, because the sheer beauty and depth of his intellect shows me someone who is very much a brother of mine in the Catholic faith, even though he was a Lutheran.